There is a unique kind of betrayal that doesn't leave bruises or break bones, but somehow leaves you shattered just the same. It's when someone who knows your heart, who grew up in the same walls as you, brushes off your pain like it's an inconvenience. When siblings, the people who should know you best, look you in the eye and say, "You're being dramatic," or "Get over it," or worse, "That never even happened." The message isn't just that your hurt doesn't matter. The message is that you don't matter. And that betrayal, it stings long after the moment has passed. Childhood doesn't come with a warning label. It doesn't say these moments will shape how safe you feel in the world. So when a sibling dismisses your hurt, especially when you're young, it plants a seed of doubt. You begin to wonder if your feelings are too much, if your sensitivity is a flaw. You stop trusting your own perception of reality. One day you're crying about something that feels like your world is ending, and your sibling laughs or walks away or says, "That's not a big deal." That's not just invalidation. That's emotional abandonment disguised as tough love. And here's the thing, this isn't about needing constant validation or expecting everyone to cater to your emotions. It's about basic acknowledgement. It's about needing the people closest to you to say, "I see that you're hurting," instead of turning your pain into a punchline or pretending it doesn't exist. We are wired for connection. And the dismissal of pain, especially by a sibling, isn't just cold, it's a rupture, a violation of trust that teaches you not to reach out again. Fast forward to adulthood, and that same dynamic often lingers. You share something vulnerable, a loss, a fear, a difficult choice, and your sibling rolls their eyes or changes the subject. Maybe they say, "You're always negative," or "too emotional." The words change, but the wound is the same. It says, "Your emotions make me uncomfortable, so I will make you feel small for having them." And that's not love. That's avoidance wrapped in a smirk. Some betrayals can be repaired. But when someone repeatedly dismisses your pain, especially over years, especially from someone who should have had your back, that's a boundary. That's not something you need to keep forgiving, because forgiveness without accountability is just enabling. And family isn't a hall pass for cruelty. The hardest part, you might still love them. You might still want to share your wins or ask for advice. But love doesn't mean access. Love doesn't mean exposure. You can love someone and still say, "You don't get to handle my heart like that anymore." That's not bitterness. That's healing. That's choosing to protect the most tender parts of yourself when someone else has shown they won't. 2, weaponizing your secrets. There's a sacredness to secrets, not the dark, shame-coated kind we bury in the back of our minds, but the vulnerable truths we hand over gently, like glass. Trusting someone won't drop them. With siblings, that trust often forms early. Late night talks, whispered confessions behind closed doors, laughter and tears shared over nothing and everything. You believe there's an unspoken agreement. What I share with you stays with you. You are my safe place. But when that promise is broken, especially by someone you considered your emotional anchor, it doesn't just feel like betrayal, it feels like exposure. Some betrayals come with a loud bang, shouting matches or slamming doors. But this one, it's quieter. It shows up in the form of your secrets being used as leverage. Maybe in an argument, they bring up something deeply personal. You once confided in them. Or worse, they tell others, cousins, friends, parents. Sometimes with a smirk, sometimes masked as concern. "I just thought they should know," they'll say. But the real message is clear. What you shared isn't safe with me. I will use your vulnerability to win. There's a word for this kind of violation: manipulation. But when it happens inside a family, and especially between siblings, it can take years to name it. We're taught that family arguments are just part of growing up, that if your brother or sister betrays you, you should just let it go because they're blood. But what we're not told is that betrayal from someone who's supposed to protect you doesn't just sting, it rewrites your internal rule book. It teaches you not to open up, not to trust easily. It tells you that even love comes with a price tag. What makes this betrayal even more painful is that it's usually delivered with familiarity. Your sibling knows how to hit where it hurts because they've seen your softest parts. And instead of guarding them, they turn those parts into weapons. They'll bring up your struggles when they want to win an argument. They'll joke about your insecurities in front of others, or they'll casually drop truths that were never meant for anyone else's ears. And when you call them out, they might say it was just a joke, but jokes at your expense aren't funny. They're deflections of guilt. This behavior is often dismissed as sibling rivalry, but let's be clear, rivalry is healthy competition. What we're talking about is relational sabotage. It's betrayal wrapped in familiarity. It's a sibling looking at your most private, intimate self and saying, even if silently, I will use this when it suits me. That doesn't come from a place of love. That comes from a place of control. And you don't need to keep forgiving it just because it came from someone who shares your last name. Forgiveness, in its most honest form, is not about pretending the wound never happened. It's about healing in a way that doesn't require re-exposure. You can forgive someone and still never share another secret with them again. You can love a sibling and still decide, I don't trust you with my inner world anymore. That boundary is not cruelty, that's self-respect. That's saying, I choose to protect myself from repeat harm. Maybe they'll never understand the depth of what they did. Maybe they'll tell you you're too sensitive, but you don't need their validation to trust your own experience. When someone uses your vulnerability as ammunition, they lose the right to access that vulnerability again. And you get to choose peace over proximity, healing over history, trust over tradition. 3, sabotaging your success. Success doesn't always show up in trophies or promotions. Sometimes it looks like healing. Sometimes it's setting boundaries that were never modeled for you, or finally pursuing something that once felt out of reach. And sometimes it's simply growing into a version of yourself that your past never saw coming. But when that growth is met not with pride, but with resentment, silence, or sabotage from a sibling, that's not just disappointing, that's betrayal in disguise. There's a pain that comes from realizing the person you thought would cheer the loudest for you is secretly hoping you trip. They don't say it directly, that would be too obvious. Instead, it's the passive-aggressive comments, the comparisons, the jokes that carry a knife behind the laugh. Must be nice to have time for that, or you think you're better than us now. You tell yourself they don't mean it. You minimize, you rationalize, because the alternative, admitting they're rooting against you, feels unbearable. But you know it. Deep down, you feel it. You notice how they go quiet when others praise you, how they downplay your achievements in front of family, how they always manage to point out the one thing you haven't done. And it's not about jealousy. Not really. It's about discomfort. Your growth confronts their stagnation. Your courage reminds them of the chances they didn't take. And instead of sitting with that discomfort, they turn it on you. When siblings sabotage your success, whether through criticism, withholding support, or subtle acts of undermining, it can fracture the foundation of your relationship. Because these aren't strangers. These are people who know what you've overcome, who saw the late nights, the fear, the hustle, and still, instead of celebrating you, they diminish you. That's not sibling teasing. That's emotional undercutting. And if it's repeated over time, it becomes a pattern of betrayal. One of the hardest parts is grieving the celebration you never got, the phone call that never came, the I'm proud of you that stayed silent. And even harder than that is accepting that not everyone gets to come with you as you grow. Some siblings don't sabotage out of cruelty. They do it because your success forces them to face their own unrealized potential. But recognizing the reason doesn't excuse the behavior. Understanding why they hurt you doesn't make the pain disappear. You're allowed to protect your joy, to stop shrinking your wins just to keep someone else comfortable. That's not arrogance, that's integrity. You're allowed to say, this matters to me, and I'm no longer going to hide it just to make you feel okay. And if your sibling can't handle your light, that's not your burden to carry. You don't need to prove your worth to people who only see you through the lens of their own insecurity. Success in its truest form is not just about accomplishment, it's about alignment, living in a way that honors who you are and what you're here to do. Anyone who tries to pull you off that path, especially someone who's supposed to love you unconditionally, is not supporting you, they're sabotaging you. And that deserves a boundary, not another chance. Let them think what they want. Let them talk. Because at the end of the day, you don't owe anyone the dimming of your light, especially not someone who tried to turn it off the moment it began to shine. Let your growth be the proof. Let your peace be the boundary. 4, mocking what makes you different. There's a moment many of us remember. Maybe you were too quiet, too loud, too creative, too sensitive, too weird, and someone laughed. Not a stranger, not a classmate, a sibling. The one who was supposed to know your heart, the one you thought would defend you against the world. Instead, they made your difference the punchline. It's a wound that doesn't show up in medical records, but it shows up every time you second guess yourself. Every time you edit who you are in the presence of people who might laugh too. When your sibling mocks the part of you that is most you, your interests, your identity, your body, your dreams, it does more than hurt. It shames. And shame, unlike guilt, doesn't say, I did something wrong. Shame says, I am wrong. The mocking often comes under the guise of just joking or light teasing, but we know the difference. A joke lands with laughter. Mockery lands like a stone in the stomach. It's how your singing voice got quieter. It's why you stopped showing them your art. It's why you became an expert at blending in when you were born to stand out. What makes this kind of betrayal so difficult to name is that it hides behind the myth of sibling teasing. That's just how we are, people say. But constant teasing that targets identity, creativity, or individuality isn't bonding, it's belittling. And when it's relentless, it becomes internalized. You begin to anticipate mockery before you even speak. You beat yourself to the punchline so they can't. It becomes a reflex. Shrink first, survive second. Never show your full self again. Years later, even when the mocking stops, the impact lingers. You might succeed at something and still hear their voice in your head. You might express joy and feel silly doing it. You might love something deeply but hesitate to share it because you're afraid someone will scoff. That voice, their voice, is now part of the soundtrack of your inner world. And that's not just unfortunate, that's trauma dressed in family dynamics. The truth is, your difference is not a defect. It's your brilliance. It's your fingerprint. And anyone who mocks it, especially someone who is meant to love you unconditionally, is showing you something about their discomfort, not your worth. You don't need to keep inviting someone into your life who treats your authenticity like it's embarrassing. You can grieve what you hoped they'd be. You can forgive if you want, but you do not, under any circumstances, have to tolerate being made small just to be in the room. Your different is your magic. Protect it fiercely. 5, turning others against you. There's a particular kind of betrayal that doesn't happen in your face. It happens in whispers, sideways glances, and stories that you weren't invited into. It's the moment you realize your sibling hasn't just hurt you directly, they've recruited an audience. They've shared your private pain with others twisted your intentions, and planted doubts about who you are. Suddenly, people in your own family look at you differently, not because of what you did, but because of what they've been told. It's not just betrayal, it's character assassination with a familiar face. We often expect conflict within relationships to be linear. Person A hurts person B, they talk, they repair, but when a sibling turns others against you, they create a triangle. They enlist validation, sympathy, or outrage from other family members or friends to justify their actions, often without telling the full story or any of it accurately. You become too emotional, too dramatic, or impossible to deal with in narratives you didn't even know were being written. And because it's coming from someone close to you, people believe it. They trust their version more than they trust your truth. This kind of betrayal is so insidious because it isolates you. It doesn't just damage the sibling bond, it poisons your other relationships. You start questioning if anyone actually knows you. You wonder if speaking up will make it worse. And often you stay silent to avoid confirming the very accusations made against you. It's a trap. You're cast as the villain in someone else's story, and silence becomes your only defense. That silence over time becomes suffocating. It begins to feel like erasure. What drives this behavior? Often it's projection. Your sibling may be avoiding accountability, redirecting shame, or retaliating for a perceived slight. But motive doesn't undo damage. Even if it comes from insecurity or fear, the outcome is still the same: betrayal, division, and a deep rupture of trust. When a sibling recruits others into conflict instead of coming directly to you, they don't just break the bond, they corrode the ecosystem around you. And rebuilding from that takes more than apologies. It takes truth-telling, time, and often distance. You are allowed to draw the line. You are allowed to say, if you have something to say about me, say it to me, not behind me. You are allowed to ask for clarity and protect your name. And if the people who heard their version never asked for yours, that says more about them than you. You do not have to keep explaining yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. The circle may shrink, but your peace will expand. And sometimes that's the cost of reclaiming your story. 6, pretending you don't exist in crisis. When everything falls apart, when the job is lost, the marriage ends, the diagnosis lands, or the grief hits, you look around for the people who are supposed to show up, not perfectly, not with solutions, but with presence. You think of your siblings, the people who shared childhood with you, the ones who know the history behind your silence. But sometimes the silence you receive from them during your lowest moment is louder than any scream. That silence doesn't just feel like neglect, it feels like erasure. It says, you're on your own. It's hard to describe the ache of being invisible during a crisis. It's not always about what someone did. It's about what they didn't do. The text that never came, the call that never happened, the empty seat at the hospital, the absence at the funeral. And maybe, just maybe, they'll say they didn't know what to say. But when someone you love is suffering, silence doesn't protect them, it isolates them. The message you hear in the quiet is not, I don't know how to help. The message is, you're not worth helping. When a sibling vanishes during your darkest hour, it leaves a scar because it contradicts what we're told family is supposed to be. The fallback, the safety net, the people who show up when the world walks out. So when they walk out too, or worse, pretend nothing happened at all, it dismantles the story you told yourself about what family means. The betrayal isn't just in the absence. It's in the rewriting of reality. Your pain was real, and they acted like you were fine. That gaslighting by omission can be just as damaging as words. What often complicates this kind of betrayal is the subtle rewriting that follows. Maybe they eventually come around, but never acknowledge the gap. Or they act like nothing ever happened, casually texting about holiday plans like they didn't leave you to suffer in silence. You start to question if bringing it up makes you ungrateful or dramatic, but naming abandonment is not bitterness. It's truth telling. It's saying you weren't there and that mattered. Pretending nothing happened doesn't restore trust. It deepens the wound. You don't have to beg for care. You don't have to explain what should be obvious. And you certainly don't have to keep offering access to people who only remember you when it's convenient. Crisis reveals character. It strips away performance and shows us who can sit in the fire with us and who disappears the moment it gets hot. When a sibling pretends you don't exist in your hardest moments, believe that message and protect your peace accordingly. You deserve presence, not excuses. 7, competing with your healing. Healing isn't linear and it's never loud. Most of the time, it looks like quietly choosing differently, not responding to provocation, naming patterns you used to excuse, saying no without guilt, or sitting in the discomfort of growth without needing to explain it. But when your sibling treats your healing not as sacred, but as something to compete with, it becomes one of the most invisible betrayals of all. Because what they're saying beneath the surface is your progress threatens me. At first, it might look like comparison. You set a boundary and they accuse you of being distant. You go to therapy and they roll their eyes or joke about how you think you're better now. You try to break a generational cycle and they say you're just trying to be different for the sake of it. What they are doing, often without realizing it, is trying to drag you back into a version of yourself that made them comfortable, a version that didn't challenge the system, a version that kept the dysfunction running. When a sibling competes with your healing, they may subtly mock your growth or try to one-up it. Suddenly they're the victim, telling everyone you've changed, and not in a good way. Maybe they start copying your language without embracing the work behind it. They'll throw around words like boundaries and self-care, but only to deflect accountability. In truth, they're not on a healing journey, they're in a race. And in their mind, your peace is their loss. This behavior isn't just frustrating, it's destabilizing, because healing already comes with loneliness. You grieve parts of yourself that used to tolerate what now feels intolerable. And when a sibling refuses to meet you where you are, not because they can't, but because they won't, the betrayal feels double-edged. You're not just losing connection, you're being punished for doing the work. But here's the truth. People who aren't willing to face themselves will always feel triggered by those who are. You don't owe anyone your regression. You don't need to defend the boundaries that keep you healthy. Healing is not a competition, it's not a hierarchy, and it's certainly not a betrayal. You're allowed to grow beyond the story your sibling is still trapped in. And if they choose to compete instead of collaborate, to criticize instead of connect, that's not a signal to shrink, it's a cue to rise. Quietly, consistently, and without apology.